Hi, my name's John Singer. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer for Virtual Bridges, and I'm going to spend the next 20 minutes or so talking to you about moving beyond the point-and-click cloud management that's so common in the enterprise today. What most of us don't understand is how much of the cloud we use in our day-to-day life. Maybe at home we're using Netflix, which runs entirely on Amazon, and at work we might run on Salesforce. They're accredited with one of the first clouds that's ever been designed. But to really understand what we're doing with the cloud, we need to look at all these other tools and these companies that are producing these solutions and tacking on the name cloud to them. What's Dell doing? What's HP doing? Oracle just came out with something recently related to OpenStack. And as we start to investigate, we start to understand that the cloud has really many different faces, and you can still be surprised. So it's kind of interesting. As I was doing some research for this deck, I typed in home into Google to do a search, and I came up with, well, a couple of things, but what was really interesting is that it pulled up a map to my house. And I think it just shows, it's a great example of showing how integrated we are with the concept of cloud and sharing data. And, well, I have an Android phone and I use Chrome, and you know, I'm definitely a user that exists in many different places online. To bring it all together so that Google knows exactly what I might be looking for when I type in home into Google. I think it's just a great example of how ingrained cloud has become in our life. If you're in IT or business IT and are familiar with cloud at all, then you've heard the as a service acronyms. There's quite a few, but I'm going to go through a few of the more popular ones right now. First is infrastructure as a service. This means basically that you're automating standing up virtual infrastructure, which are most commonly servers. Could be network infrastructure, could be virtual desktops even, but actually there's specific acronyms for those now. Platform as a service would be the second one, and that means that you're standing up an entire platform that you can deploy on, or your engineering team can deploy on. So for instance, say I need 2 Apache servers and 2 MySQL databases behind those for high availability or failover. And then on top of all of that, maybe I want a load balancer. Platform as a service permits you to do those types of things. Very powerful, and the next evolution of infrastructure as a service, in my opinion. Software as a service. This is most commonly related to things like Office 365 or Gmail are 2 great examples. Salesforce is probably the most common software as a service platform in business. And software as a service, one of the key things that continues to promote this type of technology is that you want to be able to use this across multiple different types of devices. And it's most commonly rendered in HTML5. Desktops as a service is another one. Virtual Bridges, the company that I work for, this is our specialty, is understanding how and where and when and why to deploy virtual desktops and how to do it efficiently in the cloud. And it's very compelling. Finally, as a service. I guess I put this in here because as a service just seems to be another name for you're going to do it in an automated fashion, in an agile way that will allow your users, whether they are your employees or whether they're your actual customers, to deploy and use virtual infrastructure or its resources easily, effectively. So in addition to all those as a service type concepts that are out there, the other really key thing to understand that cloud enables is development operations, or DevOps. When you hear somebody talking about DevOps, it actually means that development is replacing operations, at least during the development life cycle, if not actually in the production deployment. And sometimes where this starts to make sense is when you think about the clouds all have APIs that can be leveraged. And if those APIs are capable of deploying servers, then you don't need an operations engineer to deploy the servers. Instead, you can allow the application to deploy the servers. Second thing is big data, and that fun-looking elephant there is the Hadoop emblem, and they really paved the way for the concept of big data, just massive amounts of data, whether that's gene sequences or whether that's your sales data over the past year. Big data has really taken off on the cloud in a big way, and in turn, big analytics have. In fact, what you're looking at here actually is hashtag big data on Twitter. Is everybody talking about big data and how they're related, and this is a Twitter map of just that big data hashtag. Thought it was pretty interesting to see not only the number of people, but just the ability to show the interconnected relationships. It's very powerful and useful in so many different. Okay, so you've decided that you want to use a cloud, but you're not sure exactly what type of cloud you want to use. You have plenty of different options. First, if you choose to go with a public cloud, you got to consider some of the key leaders in the space. Rackspace, they are one of the original contributors to OpenStack, and their cloud is based on the OpenStack model, and they actually were the ones that invented the Swift project that they donated into OpenStack in 2010. Right now, they're the largest OpenStack-based public cloud provider, and they compete with the types of like Amazon, and everybody's very familiar with Amazon. Amazon Web Services is probably one of the most familiar brands in the public cloud space, and they're unrivaled in their ease of deployment and capabilities that they provide. Everything from storage to compute to platform to whole infrastructure, and they really are one of the top offerings in the space, simply because of their ease of use. Microsoft is on its way with the Azure cloud, and they've made a little bit of rattle about this over the past year, but I really believe we're going to see that accelerate over this next year here in 2014. And then you can count in a couple others too that I didn't put on this slide in the public space, like VMware announced vCloud, or their hybrid cloud rather, that they're going to be offering. And HP also has an OpenStack-based public cloud, as well as a few others that have gone this route. The bottom line is all of these are easy to consume. You'll see a lot of common traits across each of these public clouds, but it's generally considered not the best place to store secure data, and so it has to be considered in whether, well, maybe a public cloud isn't right for everything in my business, and maybe instead I'm interested in a on-premises solution, which would be a private cloud. And the good news is there's lots of options here as well. Probably the one of the key solutions is OpenStack, because it's free, it's open source. There's a lot of buzz behind it right now in the technology sector. It's been around since 2010 when Rackspace and NASA got together and contributed the first two pieces of it, and it's still accelerating very rapidly. With OpenStack and even with CloudStack, which is Citrix donated CloudStack after buying Cloud.com, both of these are open source solutions, which are great because you don't have to pay the licensing fees. It's worth considering, though, that because you're not paying licensing fees, you also don't necessarily, it's not one company standing behind it, and so you may be challenged for support, and it's really important that you have the right operations engineers that understand how to design, configure, stand up, and maintain either of these types of clouds. And then on the proprietary side, VMware rules the data center in terms of virtualization. I think I read a 451 report recently that said 55% of virtualization globally is done on VMware, and most people would consider that pretty conservative. But from a cloud perspective, meaning the automated orchestration and the agility that we've been talking about here, VMware has a product that they just announced recently, the Cloud Automation Center, and this product is, gives you all the orchestration that you're looking for, but at a cost. You're paying much higher licensing fees. You're paying licensing fees that you wouldn't be with the open source solutions, and you still need dedicated support engineers in order to run it. Kind of excited about Microsoft and what they're doing with Azure and Hyper-V and integration into SCCM and some of the work that they've done, so it's worth keeping an eye on there. Most people have Microsoft Server in their data center, so it's not a far stretch to assume that Microsoft's going to continue to inject themselves into the cloud space. We're going to see a lot more activity there, and it just gives you another option as you're looking at what solutions best suit you. But maybe just a private cloud, because of its initial investment, isn't exactly what you're looking for. Your returns will be very high, but in most cases, a hybrid cloud is what makes sense for most people. It's being able to create that bridge and between the public cloud and the private cloud in order to use both for their strengths. You're able to get your data segregation, so maybe you keep your secure data on your private cloud and your insecure data on your public cloud, or certain services or certain applications are suited better for one or the other, and based on cost or based on your operations expertise, you can decide. You also have the advantage of geo-instantiation. You may have a private cloud in one city and you want to use a public cloud in another for simply keeping the data closest to the consumer. Bursting is huge. Bursting really is describing the ability to take workload from a private cloud, and when that cloud has reached its capacity, as it may during Black Friday, for example, if you have a website, or Cyber Monday rather, if you have a website online that's selling a widget and Cyber Monday is your biggest day of the year, maybe you don't want to invest in that infrastructure for the rest of the year when you really only need it on Cyber Monday. You can burst to the public cloud, and then things will rein back in automatically when Cyber Monday or when the holiday season's over. So that type of capability is really powerful. You could also use that as an example of big data or analytics. If you're running a particularly high workload for a short period of time, well, pay a little bit extra per compute hour and burst to the public cloud, and then rein things back in when your workloads normalize. Finally, all of these things provide high availability, and I think that's really important to note here, is that you're able to spread your load across multiple endpoints. Okay, so we talked about why you might want a cloud, and we talked about some of the ways that you can consume them, whether they're public or private, but let's talk about some of the challenges. What's the dark side of cloud? I think probably one of the most obvious ones is how easy they are to consume. And I'm mostly talking about the public side, but a properly implemented private cloud is also very easy to consume. And if you've got a credit card or maybe a cost center number, or depending on how you've implemented your private cloud, it starts with that, and your employees that have corporate cards or these cost centers can use those to deploy a server, and then they get instantly productive and your code monkeys start hacking away. What you have to watch out for, though, is something called cloud sprawl. And a good way to explain this is to think about if you've got one employee with the credit card who's decided to deploy a server, or maybe another employee's decided to deploy 2 servers on one of these public cloud services, that's not so bad. But as you start adding employees and giving them the ability to deploy servers, pretty soon you've got a bunch of them that understand how they can quickly consume and create these services that are available publicly, that your cost starts rising exponentially. And really, unless you're Walter White, you're not going to be able to afford this, and you're definitely not going to be able to understand why you're affording this. And that's called cloud sprawl, and that's a real challenge right now in cloud computing. So the question becomes, how do you keep your employees productive, and how do you keep this efficiency there without going broke and without suffering the expense of cloud sprawl? I'm going to give you 3 things to keep an eye out for as you start your journey into the cloud here. The first is access control. You got to choose your cloud carefully and choose the people that can have access to that cloud very carefully. So in a public scenario with a company like Amazon or Rackspace, this is easier done because the credit cards that you distribute to your employees that may be able to open these accounts, or the expense reports that you can approve, are more easily regulated. But on a private side, if you're dealing with cost centers, or if you're dealing with just opening up infrastructure as a service or any of the other service-based platforms to your employees, it can get a little more complicated. So keep in mind that only the employees that should have access are given access. Centralized management is a key component of this. You should be able to see everybody that has access at a glance, and then segregate the roles. If I've got a development organization and I have an operations or engineering organization, they may have 2 completely different needs, and so splitting up the roles of maybe the managers in those organizations versus the employees, and breaking down who needs what and when, is going to be key to your success here. The second thing to consider is chargeback. And everybody should be paying for what they're using. It shouldn't just be all hitting the same bottom line. So if you have employees currently that are going out to your private cloud, then that's fine, but it needs to track back to their organization or to that employee specifically. You want to be able to split up those charges that are being incurred by the development organization versus the engineering organization. And part of what can help this is if you pick a solution, a chargeback solution that you can trust. More often than not, this isn't going to be the default solution out of the box with the cloud vendor that you picked. Although some of them are getting much better, there's also some independent third-party solutions that are really good, and I highly suggest you research those prior to engaging in this. Also, again, segregation makes a lot of sense here. When you're dealing with chargeback, you do want to segregate, and it goes back to that access control. Segregate your development costs from your operations costs, and at the end of the day, you're going to be able to break down and see exactly where your money's being spent and where you can optimize further. Finally, automation. And it's kind of an underpinning theme throughout everything that I've been talking about here. But one of the key things there is DevOps. I talked about it a little bit earlier, and really you need to understand that DevOps takes the responsibility or the onus of deploying the infrastructure out of the engineering hands, out of the hands of your development engineers or maybe your operations engineers, and puts it on the application. And if you develop a robust application that understands properly how and when to deploy new infrastructure for its use, or maybe from a developer perspective, it will understand during build time what it needs in order to build for proper testing or quality assurance, then the human factor is out of this. And now it's all done through programming, and the programming will save you time and again if it's done appropriately. Integrating automation voraciously is a key point here, because ultimately you don't want to create more lag time. The whole reason the cloud is the cloud has taken off in the way that it has is the ease of implementation and the ease of use that the end consumer has. Ultimately, it comes to the user experience. When somebody needs infrastructure, they're provisioned it quickly and efficiently, and then it can be torn down just as easy and recycled for something else. Whatever you do, you don't want to take that away from your employee base. Otherwise, you'll lose so many of these benefits that cloud computing offers. Remember that the key is the employees. The key is those developers, and that's what's going to increase your productivity. You want as many happy code monkeys as possible. So 3 quick thoughts here before we wrap up. First of all, we talked about you're already using the cloud at home and at work, whether you realize it or not, and you're going to continue to use it. It's an emerging technology that hasn't reached its apex yet, and it's very compelling when implemented appropriately. But manage your employees carefully, because you don't want to suffer from the challenges that can be brought by cloud sprawl, the costs that can be incurred, and governing the cloud appropriately will net you so much more than just allowing for this powerful tool just to be used any way that the employee chooses. Weigh your options and implement before you start suffering from cloud sprawl. Don't just decide without careful consideration and research which cloud companies you're going to associate yourself with, because as soon as you do, you could start suffering from lock-in in a number of different ways, or you could start incurring the cost of cloud sprawl and find it very difficult to rein under control. So thank you for joining me today as we talked about going beyond point-and-click cloud management, and I hope that I was able to provide you with some information that will help you as you begin your journey into cloud computing. If you have any questions about what we do here at Virtual Bridges, or any questions around what I've talked about today, feel free to visit my blog on vbridges.com, or if you're interested in any of our products, please contact sales@vbridges.com. Thank you.